presenting ABC News, but tomorrow night on Primetime Live, Jeffrey Patterson, the Marine Corps CO from Hawaii. So you might want to take a look at that. The way I like to start is to find out what kind of subjects you would like me to discuss. Are there specific questions that people have? Besides, what is conscientious objection?
I'm curious as to how many people who apply to conscientious objectors actually go to this.
Good question. Okay. Well, let me start with that. You've hit the problem. The problem is that the military looks at conscientious objection as anathema. It kind of defines you as the enemy of the military people. The idea of conscientious objection is that you are opposed to war in any form. And the definition of war in any form is a matter of controversy. But what it implies to the military mind is that those people who choose to make the military a profession are doing something immoral. So a conscientious objector starts off in the very beginning as being viewed as a traitor by military commanders. And as a result, as you might expect, not very many COs, conscientious objectors, have their applications for discharge or status as a non-combatant approved. Now it used to be, that is up until August 2nd, that COs are running about 50%. Half of those who applied got approved. After August 2nd, it's running 99% disapproval. And I'm giving the military the benefit of the doubt, saying 99%. I've heard of one person since August 2nd who has gotten his CO discharge approved. And that's out of basically 200 to 300 people who have applied for CO discharges or reassignment to non-combatant status since August 2nd. On top of that, all those people whose decisions were being made during this time period have been denied. I started working with the young Marine reservist who applied for a CO discharge in March of this year. And his commander approved it, and the wing commander approved it. But when it got to headquarters Marine Corps, it was August, and they disapproved. They said no. And the reasons they gave for disapproving it, they gave three reasons. One, they said that he had come to his conscientious objection beliefs after his enlistment, therefore they were disapproving it. Now this is contrary to their own regulations. In order to get in the military, you have to sign a lot of forms along with your enlistment contract. One of them says, I am not a conscientious objector. So if you, by definition, were a conscientious objector before you enlisted, you should not have been allowed to enlist. And if you did enlist, you enlisted fraudulently, and they can court-martial you for that. So by them saying that he couldn't, they couldn't approve his CO discharge because he had become a CO after he enlisted, they violated their own regulations. One of the other reasons they gave was that his beliefs were a mixture of religious and political opinions. Now, in the regulations, all the service regulations, they recognize the fact that a lot of people's religious convictions influence their opinions of foreign policy and politics. Therefore, in regulations, it says the CO application can be denied only if their beliefs are only political, with no religious, ethical, or moral overtones. So by the Marine Corps denying his application because it's a mixture of the two, they again are violating their own regulations. And the third reason they gave was that they said his belief was neither firm nor fixed. They don't have to give evidence for anything in their denials. Now, the fact was that he started off in the Marine Corps and he was working in a flower shop. After he got through basic training and a couple of months of drill, he decided that he didn't want anything more to do with the Marines. And he put himself through college to become an emergency medical technician. He didn't use the GI Bill. He didn't touch it. He didn't want anything to do with the Marine Corps. So he used his own money. And he was working 14-hour days on the ambulance saving lives because that's what he wanted to do. The Marine Corps, his experience in the Marines had convinced him that it was wrong to participate in war and take life. And as a result, he became somebody who decided he wanted to save life. Now, they say that that is not evidence of having changed your belief or having firm or fixed beliefs. So again, that they are basically telling everybody in the military or in the public that wants to hear about it, that nobody's going to get out as a conscientious objector, even if they have to violate their own regulations to deny them what is rightfully due them. Now, when it comes to the draft, we might face a similar situation. 4 years ago, the draft regulations were being reviewed by the Congress. The Selective Service System, the SSS, had decided that they wanted to have the conscientious objector review boards to consist solely of military officers. And that's the way it was going to stand until a lot of us stood up and said, no, this is absolutely ridiculous to have military officers making this decision. And luckily it got changed. So as it stands now, it will be civilians who will be making decisions on whether or not you qualify as a conscientious objector under the draft. We don't know what kind of people they're going to assign to this or have been assigned to this. During Vietnam, most of those people on the draft board were veterans. Not just anti-war veterans like me, but the gung-ho type of veterans who saw nothing wrong with bombing them back to the Stone Age and all the other right-wing militaristic propaganda that was so popular then, and unfortunately we're hearing more and more of today. So for people considering conscientious objection under the draft, you've got to be aware of the fact that, number one, the people making the decisions in your case may be totally unsympathetic. And there were draft boards during Vietnam that had a 0% approval rate for conscientious objections. Every single one was turned in. Fortunately, during the current time period, there are several people who have been appointed to the draft boards around the country who are on our side and let us know what's going on in the Selective Service, kind of our spies. But they're not really. I mean, they're just citizens who see something wrong and they want to tell us about it.
One, I was under the impression that at least at some point in the 80s, draft boards had been selected. Secondly, how would the jurisdiction work to decide what board you would see, a la getting away from one that has a zero, CO,
Right.
grant?
The jurisdictional problem is the easiest. That's simply moving. Changing your permanent residence and re-registering with the draft board once you move. That was real common during Vietnam. A lot of students were moving around. Now the problem came in because the draft boards were not self-selecting. They were selected by the higher-ups. Draft boards have been appointed now. There are draft boards in place. And the way that the process has been set up to work is that you go to your local board and they make a determination. If you're unsatisfied, then you go to a regional board. You appeal those decisions to a regional board. And if you're still dissatisfied, then there's a national board to appeal those decisions to. Now, from what we've been able to understand about the people selected for the current draft boards, you probably don't know any of them. These are basically well-established businessmen and in a lot of cases reservists who are at full-time active duty. They're in the reserve, they're operating reserve units, but they're active duty. Do we have any reservists here, by the way? Okay.
How were they,
Oh, good.
how were the people that are sitting on boards chosen, or if they're volunteers, or they're paid first, secondly, if they are volunteers, or either way, how did SSS let them know they were looking for them?
Basically Reagan. I mean, it's a political appointment. And so the word came down from up on high during the 80s that draft boards will be selected with the following criteria. The criteria on the surface, if you just looked at the piece of paper, looks fairly legitimate. Community leaders, outstanding moral character, involvement in community affairs, et cetera, but in reality, the people selected were basically very, very conservative. Not conservative in the sense that we should spend more money on this rather than this, or conservative in abortion versus choice, whatever. Conservative in the idea that everybody owes their life to the state, kind of conservative. These were not libertarian in the Republican Party. They are people that, in general, would be unsympathetic to conscientious objection claims. Part of the reason for this is, in each age group, there's about 2 million young men that are 20 years old, 21 years old, 22 years old, etc. It's about 2 million. It's a pool that they have to draw from in a draft. Half of those people are not going to be qualified for medical or moral reasons. Medical reasons are rather obvious: flat feet, asthma, allergic to bee stings, all host of medical problems. The moral reasons are not as obvious. First of all, there's the obvious one of being a convicted felon. So a lot of people avoided the draft by being convicted of felonies. One of the things that we will have this time that we didn't have 20 years ago is an accurate urinalysis. If you turn up positive when you go to the MEP center for your draft physical, they don't want you. Now, they have also done this on active duty military personnel. You get discharged for turning up positive on your urinalysis. So as you might well imagine, the past 3 months have seen an astonishing number of positive urinalysis because they can't get out any other way. Well, you don't get prosecuted in a criminal sense. A positive urinalysis is not proof absolute that you committed a crime. It is looked at by the military as a crime, but they are prevented by law, the Constitution, from putting you through a criminal procedure. Yes. Sorry. Part of what the military operates under is the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Goes by the initials UCMJ. That replaces the Constitution, basically. It is illegal it is against regulations to violate regulations. So if you violate a regulation, any regulation at all, you can be prosecuted under the UCMJ and therefore court-martialed. No, this is as active duty military. So what happens is the military personnel violated the regulation of having illegal drugs in their blood system or their urine, and therefore they can be prosecuted, but because the Supreme Court has yet to say that having illegal drugs in your urine is proof positive that you had full knowledge of ingesting those drugs, and it can't be used in civilian criminal courts. The military can't use it either. So what they do instead is to give you an administrative discharge. Instead of sending you through a court-martial, where you get full guarantees of rights of evidence and calling witnesses, etc., and they couldn't use that, they send you through an administrative discharge and give you an other than honorable discharge, so it robs you of VA benefits, Veterans Administration benefits. All right, that's the way the military handles it. And it shows up on your discharge paper, drug abuse. For a lot of those GIs that are active duty now, they don't care how they get out as long as they get out. They're quite willing to take an other than honorable discharge and lose the benefits that they signed up for in the first place. Having said that, then you can understand why there has been as many as 5,000 desertions in the past 3 months, which of course doesn't make the evening news. They don't want that kind of information out. We know that that's around the right number. We don't know for sure how many more. We get reports from all the major bases in the United States that there's been a couple of hundred desertions from each of these bases. Reserve units. There have been reserve units that have reported for deployment and only half have shown up. And it really makes people wonder how enthusiastic the GIs are about all this. Now this is a small number of people in reality, less than 1%. But the reality is that this is the most courageous 1% who are doing this. The other 99% of the military might disagree with what's going on, might not want to go to Saudi Arabia, might have decided themselves that it's a bad idea, but they're simply keeping their fingers crossed that they'll survive a national mistake like going to war in Saudi Arabia, which is the way it is for most people. I mean, that's the way people got into the military in the first place, was I'll sign up for the GI Bill, and sure, I might have to go to war, but maybe I won't. And they just keep their fingers crossed and hope it doesn't happen to them. And when it does, then they're up the creek without a paddle. They don't understand whenever your enlistment takes place that if the orders come down, then they got to go through them. If they don't, then they're subject to the UCMJ and they can be punished. And it's not just like a slap on the wrist. Failure to obey orders, failure to be on the boat, missing movement, unauthorized absence. You can get 5 years for any of these. Pardon?
Well, on some prosecution, people quite a bit of them know that contribution givers under the right position of prosecutors and they want to talk prison terms. Are they going to actually prosecute the contribution givers? How long?
Well, we're not certain about that.
Excuse me.
Okay. Okay, news station?
Channel 3.
Anybody mind about Channel 3 being here? Okay, then don't wait until after we get done talking. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I'm a lone woman. It's making very intense.
Well, don't feel tense.
We're all in the same boat.
Prosecution hasn't taken place in over 4 years. What's been going on for the past 4 years for non-registrants has been threatening letters in the mail. Standard form letters that 8 months after you haven't registered, you get letter number 3. 12 months after you haven't registered, you get letter number 4. These kind of things. And the possible penalties have gone up to $250,000 fine and 10 years? Yeah, 10 years in jail now. They haven't done it to anybody. I mean, just like they haven't imprisoned deserters for 5 years or 20 years, they've only put them in jail for a few months or a year at the most. But the maximum fine is still on the book. Now that it looks like we're probably going to have a draft, it's something to be worried about again. During Vietnam, all those subject to the draft, that is, men between 18 and 26, were required to carry around their stupid draft card with them. That's why draft card burning was such an outrageous act of defiance, because if you left yourself open for prosecution for not having that stupid piece of paper, it looks like the same thing's going to happen. More than that, it appears that the Federal Emergency Management Administration has devised ways to set up checkpoints. Walking down the street, being pulled over, driving down the expressway, to have your ID cards checked. And we don't know, we literally don't know what's being planned along these lines. It might be something as simple as requiring a draft card to be shown whenever you're pulled over for speeding ticket or any other quote official act. Whenever you have to use your ID card or your driver's license or something, having to show the draft card too.
Or we won't come to this point.
Well, that's a little more iffy. For example, if there's a rock concert in Toronto, there are 10,000 kids going across the border all within a couple of hour period, and they never check the IDs. They just say, yeah, wave them on across. During Vietnam, they were doing the same thing, waving them on across. That's how the deserters from the Army got out, was going to rock concerts in Toronto. Or swimming across international falls, or going through the mountains, whatever. Similar things are being arranged now. The underground networks are being set up with the idea that this might become necessary.
What if the flying, I suppose it'd be impossible to fly all the way here.
The idea that the airlines are responsible for checking draft cards wasn't one of those things that they did. However, you've got to show the passport in order to get out. And that, recording that information, the new passports have barcodes on them now. So recording that information about who's leaving, etc., might ring bells in customs. So doing international flights is different than, well, I guess Canada isn't a nation, so it would be considered an international flight, but not the same category as going outside the continent.
I can't even place on the talked about this before, not these draft reports. What kind of criteria or qualifications would allow you to be considered as a potential?
Okay. Good point. That's where I should have started. What they're looking for in draft boards are specific pieces of evidence that you have sincere beliefs and that these beliefs are coherent. By sincerity, they're looking for proof that you've had these beliefs for a length of time and that you have acted upon these beliefs in some fashion. And by coherence, they are looking for evidence that your beliefs are well thought out and not something that you've gotten from Cliff Notes or something like that. Although I've never seen Cliff Notes for COs, it might be a good idea. That is so well. It would. The sincerity issue is the most relevant for conscientious objectors. Simply because it addresses the issue head on. That is, you need to be clear and explain clearly your beliefs. This is where most conscientious objectors get fouled up. Not because they don't believe what they're saying they believe, but they simply can't communicate what they believe clearly. The sincerity, therefore, depends a lot upon your ability to articulate your beliefs. That's why I recommend a lot of study be done. Not just reading books and regurgitating what you see in the book, but actually sitting down and writing down your own feelings, your own opinions. And then, once you've done that, take it to a counselor. Any counselor. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be somebody who has a full-time job as a counselor. It could be a teacher who understands conscientious objection, or even a teacher who understands English language and the way that you can present things clearly. Just somebody to get feedback. That's real important, is being able to get other people's reaction to what you've written, because you often cannot see your own mistakes. So you might think that you've explained it, and it's absolutely opaque to anybody else who looks at it. So getting that feedback is real important. Now, the other thing about this is you've created a witness by taking it to somebody else. And that's one of the things that you want to do to prove your sincerity, is in addition to submitting your own thoughts on paper, is to get verification from other people that these are your own thoughts. So whenever you take something to somebody and ask them to look it over, a minister, your parents, a friend who is a veteran, whatever, you've created a witness who can then write a letter verifying that you took this to him or her, that they did read it on such and such a date, and etc. What you're trying to do is to convince the draft board that this is not something that you're doing to protect your own butt. The whole essence of conscientious objection is not, I don't want to die. It's, I don't want to kill. And that's the big problem for COs in the military now, is with the Iraqi invasion and the Saudi deployment, most COs are being told that they're merely cowards. Not that they don't believe them, but that they're cowards. And that's because a lot of people don't understand why it is that you wouldn't want to kill someone. Since they want to bomb it back to the Stone Age, what's wrong with you for not wanting to kill people?
What's wrong with being a coward? Can you claim that?
Well,
Yeah, well, cowards.
there is that practical aspect of it, yeah. Conscientious objection was set up for people who didn't want to kill, however. Now, the idea of not wanting to risk your own life in a senseless or even a misadventure is something that, while it may be intellectually appealing, I mean, let's face it, dying for a bad cause is not something that any of us aspire to. However, the idea behind that is that you might be willing to die for a good cause. And what that does for the reviewers looking at your conscientious objection application is they will say, well, maybe he's also not willing to kill for a bad cause, but is willing to kill for a good cause. And that blows your application right there. So you can bring it in. You can always bring in any idea you want, but you've got to understand that they will make the worst of it, whatever you bring in. I have seen somebody bring in the point that all wars are based upon greed, power, and land. Okay, well, then the conscientious objection reviewers say, aha, it's all political. You didn't mention anything about religion, morals, or ethics. It didn't matter that this was one sentence out of a 25-page essay on why all wars are wrong. And it did get into moral, religious, ethical reasons, but they focused on that one sentence. Now, it's an open question whether or not the CO would have been denied if he had left out that one sentence. Probably they would have found something else. So realizing that, I would suggest that whenever you go through this, you keep the word qualifier in mind. That is, using the word but, and, things like that, whenever you come to a sentence which might be used against you. Part of the other, well, the idea that that wars were motivated by greed and land and power. If you would have made that a dependent clause of a larger sentence, then they would have had to quote the entire sentence, unless they put those little dits in front of it, and that would have let whoever was reading their decision realize that it was taken out of context, literally.
What about all wars are stupid?
That's that's a valid criticism, but you've got to add something more onto it than that.
It's true, but
Yeah, it's true. You've got to explain stupidity. And remember who you're explaining it to. Yeah, that's a big problem.
one thing that disturbed me is one of the reasons my CO was denied is I didn't have a continuous religious background going to church solely. And I had all the reasons, statements, books, and gospel. I was in the church. Are they going to use the same basis this time?
This was late
Very
60s.
good.
Right, was it during the 60s or 70s? Changed to 70s. Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have a pastor, priest, or minister I could go to testify. I didn't go to church.
Okay. It was, I think, 73 or 72 that the decision came down that it was not only religious, but also moral and ethical beliefs. Now, do you think that was before or after your term? Before your term? Okay.
That was a while.
Okay. Part of what's going on here is a discussion. It used to be that there was no such thing as conscientious objection. Back in up until 1940, you would be imprisoned if you refused military service. From 1940 until 1972, only religious reasons, religious beliefs were looked at as valid conscientious objection claims. After the decision, the Supreme Court decisions in 72, 73, they added on religious and moral and ethical beliefs that had the same impact upon your life as did religious beliefs. In other words, you weren't required to be a member of a Quaker church or Mennonite. You weren't required to be a member of a specific church. You weren't even required to be, hopefully, you weren't supposed to have been required to be a continuous churchgoer. However, you had to demonstrate that your beliefs had an impact upon your life equal to that of religious beliefs. That's why lifestyles are very important. For example, it's real hard for policemen to get conscientious objection. Discharges or deferments from the military because of their job. There were some police who would legitimately go out and take another human being's life in the performance of duties as police, but would refuse to do this in a war because they saw it as something completely different. And a couple of them even got their reclassifications as conscientious objectors approved because they had documentation that would pile up to here. And that's really what you're doing is you're fighting a paper war. So if you go in there with a piece of paper, one sheet piece of paper with your beliefs in brief on there, it won't work. You got to go in there with something that goes through your beliefs in detail and answers all their objectives, all their objections beforehand. For example, they're going to ask you all kinds of questions. And that's probably what I want to get into right now is what it is that will stop you from getting a CO claim.
Just to pacify fears of people that might be in the military now or looking like, wait a second, I don't have a long history with this. You don't have, there's no rule that you have to come in with 10 pounds of paper or been doing it for X number of years. So don't worry that, oh my God, I haven't had a CO file to now. They're going to send my unit off in a month. The point is to prove sincerity. It helps that you have a lot of material to back that up, but if you come in with fire in the eyes and you mean it, that helps your case. So.
Yeah, it can work that way. And what they're going to do is either active duty military or a draft board, they're going to start throwing questions out at you.
Before you go into that part, because before when you asked how many reservists were here, only a few people raised their hands, so I assume that a lot of people here are concerned that there may be a draft and what to do. Can you maybe just give your opinion on what you think the likelihood of a draft is and what kind it would be? Just because I'm not even sure, because I've heard a lot of conflicting views, and I assume a lot of people are here because they're concerned that they may be drafted, or somebody that they know will be. Maybe if you could, before going into the steps, see if maybe you could explain that a little bit.
Yeah.
This relates, I called the selective service system yesterday, and I requested the second question, you have to know how old I was. And that kind of scared me, I think that means that does make a difference, and the only way that would make a difference would be if they do think that,
Yeah. Good question. Yeah, good point. Thanks. Okay. The politics, the foreign policy that we're seeing now seems to be two options. Number one is Bush wants to go in and wipe them all out immediately. Immediately actually means a war lasting many months, maybe several years. The other option is we set up a permanent force around Iraq to keep them in, or to keep ourselves out, however you want to look at it. And in either case, they're talking about a large number of people are going to be needed. Right now, about 50% of the Marines, the Marine operational forces, have already been committed to Saudi Arabia. About a third of the Army operational forces. And unbelievably, nearly 3/4 of the Air Force operational forces. Now, the reason for that is that the Air Force forgot to order spare parts. So they had to cannibalize a good percentage of their planes in order to keep the other planes in the air. So we have a lot of planes sitting around on runways all over the United States that are only missing one part, but they can't fly because they have one part that's missing. They had to use the money for Star Wars instead of spare parts for the airplanes. So it'll take them a few months to get these planes back working, and then it won't be like 75%, we'll be down to 50%. And this excludes the strategic forces, the B-52s and the missile forces. The reality is that out of these 2 million people, 2 million men who might be drafted, 1 million who might be eligible after the medical and moral exclusions, they'll probably be able to process about 700 to 800,000 people. If what we're looking at is a long, drawn-out war where they've got to recycle people in and out, and I don't just mean body bags, but that's probably what's going on, there's lots of body bags coming back, then I think we are looking at a draft. No matter which way it goes, unless there's no war at all, unless there's some sense breaks out in the world, and Saddam Hussein realizes that he's in a no-win situation. Because right now Bush thinks he's in a no-lose situation. Either there is no war because he's managed to bluff Saddam Hussein into backing down, or there is a war and he wins because of the overwhelming industrial might of our country and our coalition, and he goes down in history as the one who won the war. So he doesn't think he can lose. So Bush has no reason to back down. I don't know if Saddam Hussein realizes that he doesn't have any reason to continue with what's going on. He's not selling the oil that he invaded Kuwait for in the first place. So he's not making the money that he was griping about not having in the first place. So does that answer your question?
So you think definitely yes, and then what kind of draft would it be and who would it target?
Okay. The draft situation, the draft system targets 20-year-olds first. The way it would be set up is once Congress and the President go through the rigmarole of declaring a national emergency, authorizing a draft, starting inductions, they would have a lottery. There would be 2 drums, just like on Lotto every Wednesday and Saturday night. There would be 366 balls in each drum. One drum, each ball will have a date of the year, August 5th, June 4th, etc. The other drum will have numbers, 1 through 366. We'll stop the drums, draw out 1 ball from each, and that date and that number will be matched together, and that's it for that year. The next year, they'll do the same thing again. So the way it's set up is for those who are 19 years old, will have these numbers assigned to them. And then in the year that they turn 20, those numbers go into operation.
So they would take all 20-year-olds before they move on to 21-year-olds?
Right. They have, according to the classifications, they would take all 1As and then move on to the different sub classifications within the ones. They would leave out people who were 4Fs or treaty aliens or all the other different categories that are listed in the manual.
They're not going to spread the burden over all draft age eligible people. They're going to take as many 20-year-olds as they can get and then move on to